Hello, this is Nigli Deci speaking. 1+1 continues to work for you. The National Marathon continues. It's Friday evening, time to sum up this week, and not only this week. As always, at this hour, the studio is working for you. Natalia Mosachuk, Maxim Sukenko, and with us, as usual, is our military expert. We need to start figuring out what happened this week regarding the situation on the front line. Oleksandr Musienko, military expert, serviceman of the Defense Forces of Ukraine. Welcome. Of course, everyone wants to hear your opinion about what happened last night, the massive attack, the power outages. Some of it has already been fixed, but nevertheless, how much strength does the enemy still have to keep doing what they have planned, plunging us into darkness, destroying our energy infrastructure? And of course, the question is, in the end, is there any adequate system to counter this?
It's clear that the terror campaign was launched as expected. This was repeatedly warned about, and we understood the enemy's intentions, because we have to realize that Russia isn't coming up with anything new. They might change something at the tactical level, choose some other targets, but overall, the strategy remains the same as it was. They need to wage war against the civilian population. That is exactly what the enemy is doing, hoping to demoralize, to instill fear, to cause panic, to escalate the situation, and so on, in order to break the Ukrainian resistance. This is also directly related to what is happening at the front, because despite the overwhelming forces the enemy is throwing in, they are achieving only minor tactical successes. And in some areas, the Ukrainian defense forces are pushing the enemy back by counterattacking. Accordingly, once again, this is a massive campaign aimed at creating an image, as if Russia is gaining the upper hand there, as if they are able to plunge Ukraine into despair and that Ukraine is about to surrender. That's their plan. So how do we counter this? We counter it, of course, just as we did before, including by studying how the enemy changes tactics and by deploying various air defense systems. Absolutely all components that are working, including the territorial defense forces. I can mention one of our units, Чисте Небо, which shot down about 20 Shaheds in Dnipro, defending and covering the city of Dnipro just last night. So this is about how all components of the defense forces, all branches of the military are working to minimize the consequences. But I would add that today is actually the anniversary of when Russia began striking specifically at energy facilities. What is the difference? The enemy once again chooses, well, practically with precision, the targets themselves, and there are some differences, whether it's the energy sector that's under attack. But the difference is that back then we were exclusively on the defensive and talked about the need for air defense systems. We didn't even consider the idea that we would be launching massive strikes on Russian territory. Maybe we thought about it and we wanted to. But unfortunately, we didn't have the capabilities or the means to make those thoughts a reality. But now our situation is different. Now we have deterrence tools that I think will be actively used against the enemy. There will be responses, and they will be more frequent, more intense, and more effective. This is now the task for all components of the defense and security forces. That is to concentrate as much as possible, mobilize and take the war onto the enemy's territory, including striking central cities in Russia, such as Moscow, St. Petersburg and others. There are a lot of targets there that are of interest as objectives.
So you mean to say that by carrying out today's strike, Russia is escalating, it's raising the stakes. Ukraine is actively responding to this challenging situation. Ukraine is indeed compelled to do so and is also significantly raising the stakes in this ongoing conflict. The critical question remains, precisely how much longer can all of this truly continue?
I think that right now we are in a situation that has changed in many ways. After all, as of today, the position, including that of our overseas partners from the United States of America, is that a response needs to be shown. And this is a tomahawk. You see, a tomahawk, it's, I would say, a collective image. These are the missiles people are talking about. It's a collective image of what apparently President Trump wants to show Putin, that there will be a change in position and that Ukraine must have strength and do things it perhaps hasn't done before or didn't have the opportunity to do before in terms of expanding the geography of strikes, in terms of capabilities and possibilities. And I think that at the very least, until the United States of America demonstrates this kind of resolve, there won't be any processes, negotiations or anything else, whatever Putin says, about wanting some kind of dialogue with the US right now. It just won't happen. At this point, it's simply impossible as long as we remain in this situation. It seems to me that right now, including our partners, they really see and believe, looking at the charts, numbers and data they receive about the strikes on oil refinery facilities, they want to give Ukraine a chance to try to go further. Because otherwise...
Look, right now, literally at this very moment, unknown drones, clearly Russian, are flying over one of the NATO bases. For our partners, as you said, this could be a signal that they need to help Ukraine. In particular, there was information that new air defense systems are being sent, but it could also be interpreted as a second signal that they also need to keep some for themselves and take care of their own defense. What do you think? How will Europe act in this situation?
Well, you know, there are very active discussions going on in Europe right now. First of all, it starts with the fact that the legislation needs to be changed in countries where the army is not allowed to use weapons. Can you imagine that? That's a reality. Well, I'll tell you, it was the same for us until 2014. We also had a ban on using the armed forces, meaning only internal ones could be used. It's just that back then there were no drones, there weren't these kinds of threats, but now the situation has changed. They need to change this. It's just that Europeans had time to do it. They saw, for example, what was happening in Ukraine. Now there are active discussions. Next week, a meeting of NATO defense ministers is scheduled to take place. We'll see in Brussels how security will be ensured there. It's actually interesting. But there should be active consultations after which decisions will be made. The European Parliament has already adopted a resolution stating that drones need to be shot down, that defenses need to be strengthened. But still, the issue of strengthening this drone wall for Europe is a more distant prospect. I can say that the current discussions are about the following. How can Ukraine be strengthened? How can Ukraine be strengthened in order to weaken Russia? Because that is a short-term perspective. And for Europeans to consolidate now, to build something new, to just come to Ukraine and say, now we'll give you more weapons on your side, that won't work. Well, just imagine, hypothetically, tomorrow the situation changes, we're not able to shoot them down in the villages, and hundreds of cruise missiles head toward Poland. And what will they do? And how much time do Poland and the Baltic countries need now to build a system like the one we have? That's the question.
These are open questions.
Of course.
Are you going to the front or not?
One more thing about unmanned systems. We need to finish with Syrski's proposal. The Voice is calling for the creation of a separate branch of the military for unmanned air defense systems. What kind of branch should this be, and what new tasks could they take on?
Well, indeed, our air defense component is actually quite large, and different units are involved. This is a promising direction. It is directly related to interceptor drones, which have proven themselves to be quite effective. We simply need more of them, we need to scale up, and we need to train specialists as well. And we are also developing the advantage of a separate branch of the armed forces, because there are specialists who focus on a specific task. They learn from this, then they conduct analyses, they study the experience of application, and they start to live and breathe this work. And that's very good. Plus, you understand, these are people who are dedicated solely to this field. So this is simply something that has been brought about by today's conditions and circumstances, because things are changing for us as well. If in 2023 or 2024 the effectiveness of mobile fire groups was one thing, now it will be different. Especially if drones are flying at an altitude of 2,500 to 3,000 meters. Well, you understand. So what should we do? We also need to change, we also need to show flexibility. So this is the right decision, prompted by the realities we face today.
Russia is withdrawing troops from the south of Pokrovsk towards the Dnipropetrovsk region. But until recently, Pokrovsk was designated as a city that had to be taken at all costs. What is happening?
Well, if we're talking about Pokrovsk, it can't go unmentioned. Now, separately, I'll talk about the Dobropilya direction, where we are able to counterattack. As for Pokrovsk, there have been multiple attempts, dozens of attempts, as you can see. The enemy's tactics do not change across different directions. They are trying to cut off logistics, encircle us, and thus force our group out. The map clearly shows this. Attacks from the flanks, plus advances in the center to push our positions back. But because the enemy has somewhat weakened on the northern flank, mainly because, first of all, they moved toward Dobropilya, which they were forced to do since part of their grouping is located there, which the enemy is trying to support, and they still have certain plans to advance, so they have stabilized their flanks here because they are afraid of our counterattacks, that we might cut off the salient and straighten the front line. That's why significant forces were sent here, and these forces have been destroyed and are still being destroyed as of now. That's why it is said that the enemy is maneuvering here in various ways, trying to advance, while not forgetting that they need to hold the Dobropilya direction, where our forces continue to counterattack. But overall, if we look at the trends that were present in the summer, I can say that in the fall, the Russian group near Pokrovsk started to stall. In the summer, they had a slightly different dynamic. It was faster.
What do you attribute this to?
I attribute it to the fact that new challenges have emerged, because firstly, there have been losses. Secondly, they need to regroup their troops. Thirdly, they constantly have to deploy reserves. Fourthly, our strikes on operational targets in the occupied territories have increased. They are carried out constantly in order to reduce the enemy's ability to regroup. And in addition, what happened was that Russia had high hopes for the Dobropilia breakthrough. They committed significant forces and got drawn in. They thought they would force this battle on us and come out victorious, but now they've gotten themselves entangled in it, constantly burning through their resources there. And of course, they can't act the same way everywhere. Plus, we have to understand that on a global scale, the enemy's goal is to exert pressure along the entire front line. They have narrowed their offensive. Now it's mainly in Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk regions. There was also a local offensive in Kupiansk, but they were stopped there. Why? They maneuver along the front, looking for what they believe are weak spots in our defense, applying constant fire pressure and trying to break through. By the way, speaking of maneuvering, we now have units that I can say are doing a lot, even at the tactical level, to avoid direct combat engagements with the enemy. That is, they are essentially avoiding direct contact with small arms, destroying the enemy as they approach, using whatever means are available. This is done to minimize our own losses, so that we don't let them get within effective small arms range all the time. Sasha,
could you please tell me, do you remember we once talked about how elusive the enemy Kabis were? There was no way to counter them because planes couldn't get close enough to engage or do anything about it and so on. What's the situation with the Kabis now? How vulnerable are our units to their effects?
They are vulnerable. This still needs to be strengthened. We have units that, taking risks, are sometimes even working with manpads, though more modern ones than Strela or Igla. More modern models, which actually... You understand what it means, let's say, to detect a plane somewhere if it suddenly drops to a low altitude. Well, suddenly, because only a manpads can hit it at low altitude, there are such air defense systems that work if the target enters their radius zone. So this...
The Su aircraft was shot down recently and the Russian crew survived.
That's also the work, yes, that's also the work of our air defense. It continues. One could say that if you look at the intensity, at the number of strikes with cabs, they are still happening, but compared to what it was a year ago, they've somewhat decreased. This is related. It has decreased.
In quantity or in effectiveness?
In both effectiveness and quantity. This is because they are starting to be more cautious since they're being hunted. And our aviation also operates with risks, and various other means are working as well. Plus, not everything works out for them. And of course, in addition, the workload on Russian pilots is increasing. You see, for example, a MiG crashed there in the Lipetsk region and so on. This is also related to the fact that the workload is constant, resources are lacking and so on. But of course, these Kabis are still a problem because the issue of frontline air defense near the line remains, of course. There is...
Let me ask one question about mercenaries in the Russian army. Right now, information is spreading that Russia is actively recruiting mercenaries from Cuba. Apparently, there are already 5,000. The short-term plan is 25,000, and strategically, they want to recruit up to 100,000 Cubans. How successful has Russia been so far in recruiting mercenaries from around the world, calling them to this war?
They are definitely working on it, promising money and good rewards. They travel to Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. This is a problem, but has it increased the effectiveness of Russian units? I would say no. They are working here as well, so we need to strengthen our efforts. No.
Recently, a Cuban mercenary battalion shot one of their own soldiers.
We also need to strengthen this direction. We have recruitment centers operating accordingly, which are specifically engaged in this and offer contracts in Latin America and so on. There are those who agree. So in reality, this is something we can fight for. And ultimately, this will also be our path in a certain sense. We will encourage foreigners to sign contracts with our army. This is normal. By the way, the monetary reward for carrying out combat missions does not differ, whether the service member has a Ukrainian passport, a Colombian passport, or that of any other country. If there is a desire to learn and to keep moving forward along the path that
both sides will take,
well, I hope that we will be more effective.
Of course.
Because for us, we also have a more just idea, besides money,
than more
in Russia.
Exactly. Oleksandr Musienko, a military expert and a member of the Territorial Defense Forces, was with us explaining what happened and clarifying what took place this week.